Today we're exploring one of the UK's most criticised seaside towns. Weston-super-Mare is continually slammed in the national press as one of England's worst seaside destinations. I won't jump on the bandwagon, and in this travel guide we take an honest look at this traditional seaside town in North Somerset. I'll share lots of tips for a fun day out and visit places that I suspect reporters reaching for clickbait headlines are often unaware of. Coming up, we explore the beach and meet some locals.
Love it.
But what's special about this particular picture?
I can remember swimming in there.
We unwind in Weston's beautiful parks and reflect on the sad deterioration of some of the town's most prominent landmarks. We examine how Weston-super-Mare has changed and visit Weston Museum. Ignore the drab headlines and come and support the fantastic community in Weston and see for yourselves. You might be blown away by your time here. Of course, no trip to Weston would be complete without a visit to the Grand Pier and the beach. So I'm starting this travel guide by the seaside and meeting some of Weston's most loved and iconic residents. Weston's Donkeys. Children have been enjoying donkey rides in Weston-super-Mare since 1886, and this traditional pastime continues to be a firm family favourite. The donkeys are lovingly looked after by a family-run business. My first donkey ride was in the 1980s when I was just 2 years old, and I still love to see them on the seafront today.
I want a donkey now.
If you'd like to see footage of Weston-super-Mare during the 1980s and 90s, please do subscribe to my channel, as I'll be going through my dad's home movies and creating some nostalgic episodes about this time period. Don't forget to hit the bell button to receive a notification when I upload a new video. Occasionally, animal rights activists criticise this popular pastime and Weston-super-Mare will hit the national headlines. However, these activists are a very small minority, and I have no doubt that this much-loved seaside tradition will continue to thrive.
I love them. It's part of the seaside, isn't it? Like fish and chips, donkey rides for the children. Love it.
Let's not forget the lovely horses that are on the beach too. They tow carriages a short distance, and while many adults might like to pretend it's for the little ones, many a parent and grandparent have just as much fun riding in the carriages. This is original footage filmed by my grandpa during the 1960s. And if you'd like to see more of the carriages and what Weston was like during this time, head to my episode about Weston-super-Mare during the 1960s. I'll add a link to the episode in the description, alongside links to all the places I visit during this episode. While Weston is famous for its bustling beaches, it also has some very tranquil spots. I'll show you a couple of them in this episode, starting with the Prince Consort Gardens. It's a peaceful place to unwind with views sweeping across the sea. The hillside was originally known as Flagstaff Hill, and a flag was used as a navigational aid by ships carrying goods along the Bristol Channel. The 1800s was an exciting time for Weston, and as bathing by the sea was becoming more fashionable, the land was being increasingly developed to attract visitors. During the 1860s, the hill was developed into a public park with gardens and flower beds in memory of Prince Albert. In the years that followed, Weston saw many more developments designed to welcome holidaymakers and people who wanted to spend a day by the sea. I'd imagine the reaction to the development was divided, as developments are nowadays, with what was historically a small fishing village expanding in many ways into what we can begin to think of as modern tourism. The garden overlooks Birnbeck Pier. Birnbeck Pier opened shortly after the gardens did in 1867. Although it is currently in a shockingly sad state of disrepair, it is still an eerily enchanting and moving place to visit. The pier is unique because it is the only one in the UK that connects the mainland to an island. It's hard to imagine that in its heyday it was a busy dock for paddle steamers, with a mind-blowing 15,000 people disembarking on Birnbeck Pier every day. Many visitors came from Cardiff, especially on a Sunday when licensing laws meant that they could not have an alcoholic drink in Wales, but they could in England. It was hugely popular with tourists until the Second World War, when it was requisitioned for weapons development by the Admiralty. When the pier reopened, times had changed and paddle steamers were being replaced by other modes of transport, meaning that the number of visitors declined. The last paddle steamer to use the dock was in 1979. Sadly, the pier was not modernised to meet the new demands of the age and started falling into disrepair until it was closed to the public. Due to the extreme tidal range of the Bristol Channel, the RNLI was also based on the island, but they also left due to safety concerns and have a temporary base inland on Knightstone Road. I had interesting conversations with several people about the pier. There was a mixture of sadness, anger, and hope for the pier's future. Whatever the reaction, it was clear that locals cared very deeply about it. After a year of behind-the-scenes surveys, developing proposals and planning applications, work is scheduled to commence in autumn 2024, with the aim of reopening the pier to the public and rehousing the RNLI on the island. I would love to see it open to the public once again.
We're huge fans of the Beatles, and so we're going to try to recreate the photograph that they took with Birnbeck Pier in the background in 1963.
And this is the iconic photograph that we're attempting to recreate. We've made our way down to Beatles Rock. Carl's going to pose for the photographs. And with a little bit of digital magic, here is the final result. It might have been easier to recreate this one. While Birnbeck Pier has suffered such a terrible fate, the Grand Pier has been going from strength to strength since it opened almost 40 years later in 1904. The Grand Pier has become a much-loved symbol of the town, although its appearance has dramatically changed over the years due to a couple of fires. The first devastating fire took place in 1930 and the second was in 2008. Both times the main pavilion was destroyed. I can clearly remember the news breaking in 2008. My family, alongside so many more, was deeply saddened by the news. We visited from Bristol on the same day it caught fire, and these are the photos we took of the destruction. Despite those challenges, the pier was rebuilt and is arguably one of the country's biggest success stories, and now welcomes over 600,000 visitors every single year. I think this shows the true spirit of Weston, the sheer grit and determination to get up and running. Not only is it a huge entrepreneurial success, creating lots of jobs for the local economy, it also provides a space for future generations of families to create many happy memories. I'll show you some of what the pier has to offer, but I could easily do a whole episode on the pier alone. It is huge, with over 250 amusements and games to play, thrilling rides and seaside favourites including dodgems, a go-kart track, crazy golf and House of Horrors. I found 4p in the 2p slot machine. Amusements aren't for everyone, but there's no denying their popularity, and it's up to you how you want to spend your time on the pier. Gentle, fun, fast, turbo, or extreme. There's enough space whether you want to get stuck in or relax. Alongside entertainment, there are 5 restaurants with a range of dishes and seaside favourites, including traditional fish and chips. There's a pirate-themed bar, and the end of the pier is home to Tiffany's restaurant with wonderful views of the sea. We enjoyed a Sunday roast in Tiffany's. We will definitely return to try other items on their menu. Of course, if you want to keep your time simple, you can enjoy a stroll along the pier for just £1. And you can make the most of the various photo opportunities along the way. When you leave the pier, you exit through the gift shop.
There you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your donation.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
Thank you.
There are not 1, 2, but 3 piers in Weston-super-Mare. This one's often overlooked.
Revo is home to a restaurant and crazy golf. I remember when this was an aquarium. Like so many other buildings in Weston-super-Mare, this small pier is another example of how areas continually evolve and change. Another example are the toilet blocks, which have been successfully converted into eateries. A walk beside the sea is an absolute must in Weston. One of my favourite areas is Uphill. It's a peaceful place with stunning views across Weston Bay and Breen. It's so beautiful that I'm going to show you around this part of Weston in next week's episode. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you'll receive a notification when the episode is ready. Weston Museum is a real treasure trove of local history, starting from prehistoric man up to the present day, with lots of artefacts documenting the social history of the town. I've visited lots of museums and this one just has to be my absolute favourite. The displays are carefully curated and are full of interesting memorabilia about Weston's unique story. It is very thought-provoking and made me reflect on all the social changes in the area and how the original use of so many of the buildings and land has dramatically changed as advances in technology changed the way society travelled, shopped and lived. The museum itself is a great example of this. It was originally built in 1912 for the Weston-super-Mare Gaslight Company. It housed the company's stores and distribution workshops. At its peak, the Gaslight Company was Weston's largest private employer. Although the use has changed, I'm glad that the building has been injected with a new lease of life and shines a light on the town's interesting social history. Remember this pinwheel. I'll discuss Banksy's Dismaland and the fate of Weston's Tropicana later in this episode. We enjoyed lunch in the cafe and have since got our teapot out of the cupboard and switched back to loose leaf tea, as it was a reminder that it really does taste so much better than tea bag tea. A real highlight of the museum is the adjoining Clara's Cottage, a Victorian house which offers a unique opportunity to step back in time and reflect on the way people lived and Weston's past. One building that has not changed use is the Town Hall, which was built in 1858 and has been extended several times since then, which I guess reflects how the layers upon layers of council staff have expanded throughout the country. We're going on a quick walk along the High Street now before exploring more of Weston's interesting buildings, Seafront and Grove Park. The High Street is home to the usual array of shops you'd expect to find in towns and cities across the UK, a mixture of chains. There aren't any vacant units and it is a hugely popular area. It's also home to the Sovereign Shopping Centre and the Italian Gardens. Most of the original Italian gardens has now been covered in concrete. I'll show you some of the original features that still remain later in this episode. But for now, we'll continue our walk along the High Street, where you can see some of the original seating and statues. The Playhouse is also on the High Street and runs a variety of comedy, opera, ballet, music shows and pantomimes all year round. Next to the Playhouse is Weston Indoor Market, which was established in 1998, making it the longest running market in Weston. It's home to a variety of independent, vintage and specialist traders. As we were admiring the old photographs of Weston, we met a local historian who kindly shared some of his knowledge and stories of the area.
Turkeys. Yeah. Turkeys and geese. It would have been a mixture because this is Edwardian Britain, okay, Edwardian Weston-super-Mare. But what's special about this particular picture against all the other ones? Have a good hard look. This didn't stay in fashion very long because somebody came up to this woman and said, "Why have you got a dead bird on your hat?" So it probably wouldn't even last a season, that one. So this is around about 1904. You can tell that from the tradespeople, the way that they're dressed. Women's hemlines either shorten or lengthen. Gentlemen's lapels either widen or narrow. So we can actually see his Albert chain here. The wing collar tells us that it's Edwardian, and it probably is only 3 years after Queen Victoria's passing. So her son, the Prince Regent, takes over. So this is Edwardian Weston-super-Mare. But we've still got to come down to what's so special about the picture.
I don't know, is it still there, that building?
You're stood in it.
Oh, right.
If you notice in here, the ambient temperature is a lot cooler than it is outside.
Yeah.
That's because we didn't have refrigeration in those days.
Yes.
We were on an east-west, and the breeze actually comes through here, keeps it cooler.
So
that's
is
very
that
interesting.
The front?
That's the front.
Yeah.
At the end of the high street is Grove Park. If you're looking for a peaceful place for a picnic, it is a beautiful green space. There are plenty of benches and many paths and areas to explore. It's home to Jill's Garden, an area dedicated to the memory of Westonian Jill Dando, a TV presenter who was tragically shot dead outside her home in London. I'll show you around some of the park now, starting with the war memorial that dominates one of the gardens. We're heading back to the seafront to see the Tropicana. These photographs show how it looked in its heyday. The original pool opened in 1937 and was the largest open-air swimming pool in Europe. It had a lovely Art Deco diving board. In 1982, the pool was closed to the public for renovation after Woodspring District Council successfully applied for permission to demolish the diving boards, although they were listed. When it reopened as the Tropicana Pleasure Beach in 1983, it was initially popular, with locals and tourists loving the wave machine and pineapple-shaped water chutes. However, as fashions changed, the design of the pool did not adapt and modernise, leading to its closure in the year 2000. It lay derelict for 15 years until North Somerset Council reopened part of it as the Bay Cafe in 2015, and it hosted Banksy's Dismaland Bemusement Park. It was open for 5 weeks and over 150,000 people visited during this time, and I was one of them. Remember the pinwheel in Weston Museum? Here it is in Dismaland. Since then, the Tropicana has not been home to anything permanent. In 2022, it welcomed Seamonster, an ambitious project transforming a retired rig into an art installation that visitors could climb. It was controversial as it cost an eye-watering £10.5 million of taxpayers' money.
I can remember when the pool was open back in the 70s, I visited it with my friend. Her dad was currently working in Weston, so he dropped us off really early in the morning, about 7 o'clock. We had to wait till it all opened up, and I can remember swimming in there, in the pool. It was great fun. It's a shame really that the council, or whoever owns it, can't bring it back to its former glory. But at least it's being used as exhibitions, festivals, different events. The last event I actually went to was the Seamonster a couple of years ago, which was really good. So, but yeah, it'd be great if it was back to originally what it was. It's a pool.
I've jumped off that step. I was trying to think, was it that or that side? I think it's probably this side that I jumped off.
Yeah.
And I can remember I just went like this, and when I hit the water, it stung.
As I'm editing this video, North Somerset Council has announced it will be investing on the site after a successful bid for funding of £20 million to spend on Weston-super-Mare from central government. They are hoping to open an event space in 2025 and will be focusing on developing new buildings on the site. At this moment in time, it's not clear how much of the original building will be preserved. If you'd like to be interviewed about the Tropicana for a future video, please do get in touch. Further along the seafront between the two piers is Marine Lake and Knightstone Island. Weston-super-Mare has the second highest tidal range in the world and also has a 6-knot tidal flow, meaning it can be very dangerous. Marine Lake was created in the 1800s to provide a safe space for swimming in fresh seawater even when the tide is out. The sluice gate that holds the seawater in the cove also acts as a walkway to Knightstone Island. The island is now largely residential but was once home to swimming baths and a theatre. It is also home to a couple of tea rooms. We stopped for a treat. I wonder how many of you are going to comment about the way I added the cream and jam. Weston-super-Mare has earned itself the nickname Weston Super Mud because when the tide leaves, water is also trapped in the sand, making it difficult to walk on. There is plenty of safety information and guidance along the seafront, but sadly some people do like to ignore this, and while we were visiting, we witnessed a man being rescued. It took 3 separate teams a couple of hours to rescue him. If you'd like to watch a 10-minute documentary about this, I'll add the link to the video description. Lots of people safely enjoy spending time on the beach every day, and there's no shortage of places to buy a bucket and spade. From the promenade, you can see some of Weston's residential area, including a very big spire. Weston is home to many churches, but I thought I'd show you just this one because it dominates the skyline. Although these streets aren't usually visited by tourists, I like to wander around because the buildings are very beautiful. I was able to have a look inside Holy Trinity Church. No one was there when I entered, but I could imagine the lively music coming from the stage during worship. There are so many places of interest in Weston, but it's impossible to show them all in just one episode. However, I'll show you some more now. I'd love to hear about the places that you enjoy visiting. A fairly recent addition to the seafront is the Big Wheel. From something new to something old, Coalbrookdale Fountain is a Grade 2 listed monument. It has stood facing the elements since the early 1900s. The Winter Gardens is a significant part of Weston's seafront and played a major role in the town's tourism when it was originally built in 1927. It's now owned by Weston College. fire escape was open, so I couldn't resist a quick peek inside. Most of the original features are long gone. Do you remember the Italian gardens I showed you earlier? This part is the best preserved area. Whenever I visit, I never see anyone enjoying the space. Those people enjoying the space are my family. You're now going to hear from Colin, and he's going to share a story when he visited the Winter Gardens in 1972.
This band Roxy Music were playing down at Weston in the Winter Gardens. I had a really good concert, really enjoyed that. And when it was the end of the concert and we'd missed the last bus back to Bristol, so we stuck our thumbs out trying to get a lift out of somewhere, you know, to help us on the way back to Bristol. And there weren't many cars about and we didn't get a lift. So we were wandering around the streets of Weston, you know, about midnight or so, and getting cold. And I noticed there was a laundrette open, one of these 24-hour laundrettes, so we just went in there and sat around in the laundrette, kept dry and warmish, until the next morning, you know, so we spent a whole night in the laundrette. So it was a very memorable night that night.
The Plaza Cinema is an Art Deco cinema that was built by the Odeon chain in the 1930s. After years of neglect, the Odeon closed in 2023. Later in the same year, Merlin Cinemas reopened it and renamed it the Plaza. If you're wondering what the Beatles were doing in Weston in 1963, well, they played 6 consecutive nights here in July, during the early days of Beatlemania. Weston's Floral clock hit the headlines earlier this year when it was concreted over. North Somerset Council owned the land, but it was being maintained by the Lions Club. They decided to cover it over due to rising costs, and this led to a public outcry. The clock has since been restored by North Somerset Council. It lacks the brilliance of the original design, but it's great that the local community rallied around to protect the landmark and get it reinstated. The town is becoming increasingly colourful with street art popping up. The 4th Upfest Western Walls Street Art Festival is just around the corner at the end of August, when street artists will use some of the town's walls as their canvas. There is a street art map that you can follow. JPS is arguably Weston's most famous street artist, and there's also a trail map allowing you to find his punny pieces throughout the town. So what's the future for Weston-super-Mare? The area has undergone huge changes from its early days as a small fishing village to its tourism heyday. It is still a hugely popular place for tourists and has a fond place in the hearts of so many. The town has triumphed over significant challenges, but it has sometimes failed to respond quickly enough to the pace of technological advances that have dramatically changed the way we work, live and play. While some places did not keep up, others have been given an exciting new lease of life, and many seaside traditions, buildings and pastimes thrive. In 2010, Weston's Promenade was completely refurbished, and the centrepiece was this 8-metre high gateway. The granite stones were mined, sculpted and tested in China before being shipped to Somerset. During the 1800s, work on the promenade was carried out by locals who used natural resources in the area. To me, this gateway represents an ugly sign of the times as we stop focusing on local resources, skill, heritage and traditions, and increasingly prioritise cheaper resources and cheaper labour overseas. So I admire the people in Weston-super-Mare who fought hard to secure funding for Birnbeck Pier. I admire those who run thriving businesses. I admire those who keep British seaside traditions alive. I admire those who inject new life into old buildings. I admire those outraged locals who saved the Floral clock. I admire those who have just dared to rescue a neglected cinema. I admire the parents with crying babies, teething toddlers, or stroppy teenagers who ensure they have a good day out by the seaside. I admire those who pay £1 to go on the pier to see the sea a little differently. I think this has been more of a love letter to Weston than a travel guide, loving it despite its imperfections. But I hope that you've enjoyed watching. I hate to ask, but if you've got this far, please do subscribe to my channel and help me reach 1,000 subscribers.